within few minutes we can start our session now. Okay.
Okay. Welcome back. We are now moving on to the first session for that we are all waiting. First session is Signals and System, an overview by Gayatri A, Assistant Professor, Department of Electronics and Computer Communications Engineering, Government Engineering College, Sri Krishnapuram, Palakkad. Gayatri A, Professor Gayatri A, has received her BTech degree in Electronics and Communication Engineering from MG University, Kerala. She completed her MTech degree in Communication and Engineering and Signal Processing from Government Engineering College, Thrissur. She is currently working as Assistant Professor in ECE Department, Government Engineering College, Sri Krishnapuram. Our neighboring institute. She has publication. She has published in one publication in an international journal. She presented papers in 2 national conferences and 1 international conference. Her research interests include communication systems and signal processing. I welcome you, ma'am, to the session.
Thank you, Shubha ma'am, for your kind introduction. So am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me as a resource person for this session. So, as ma'am said, our session is on signals and systems and overview. So throughout this session, we will be concentrating mainly on these 2 categories, signals and systems. So I start from the very basics of signals. If you have any doubt, please feel free to interrupt me in between and ask me your doubts. Okay, so let me move on to my presentation. So first of all, we will be concentrating on signals. Signals, it's a term which we use very frequently in our day-to-day life. The speech or my sound, my voice is itself a signal. I can store my signal in digital form in a flash memory. And as you all know, we can use an MP3 player to convert this digital signal or digital binary data back into the signal. So an MP3 player is an example of a system which convert the binary data back into my sound. So my sound is a signal and an MP3 player is a system. We can also convert the sound signal into image signal. For example, there are many applications available nowadays in order to convert the sound into image. For example, an iTunes visualizer, which generates aesthetic and colorful patterns on the screen according to the underlying music, is an example of an app converting sound signals into image signals. So image is also a signal. There are various systems which analyzes image signals and produces results. For example, a face recognition system which identifies the face of a person standing in front of the device and comparing it with some pre-stored values and identifies him is an example of a system which uses image analysis. And all of you are maybe from computer science background. So a computer program which you write in a system is also a signal. You are writing this program in binary, zeros and ones, and it instructs the computer to do some operation. So it is also a signal. Moving on, our body generates a lot of signals. As in the keynote address, Sati ma'am said, our heartbeat, which we are plotting using this ECG, is a signal. And our brain produces EEG signals. Even the DNA molecule produces genetic signals. So signals are seen everywhere in this world. So the knowledge of signals and systems is essential for a person who is from computer science or who is from physics or who is from chemistry. Everywhere the signals and systems finds its application, and we want to analyze these signals and systems in order to have some particular results. So in order to live in this digital world, the knowledge of these signals and systems is very essential. That's why we are moving on to this topic. So now we had seen what are the importance of systems. Formally, how can we define a signal? A signal is formally defined as a function of one or more variable, and a signal is always used to convey some information. So my speech, it is a signal which varies with the time. What is the varying factor there? The amplitude of the signal or my loudness. So the loudness varies with time. There, the independent variable is the time and the dependent variable is the amplitude. So speech is a one-dimensional signal. And consider the case of an image. The image, it has two coordinates, X and Y. So it is a two-dimensional signal. If we are considering the case of a video, how we are producing a video is produced by showing images at a particular speed or at a particular rate. So there, the additional variable time arises. So video is a three-dimensional signal. Okay, so a signal is formally defined as something which varies according to some variable. In our lecture, we are concentrating on time varying signals. So a signal is something that varies with time and which carries some information. So what are the parameters of a signal? First parameter is the amplitude. The amplitude is the deviation from the equilibrium position. For most of the signals, the equilibrium position is 0. So the amplitude means what is the deviation of our signal to the positive side or to the negative side from this equilibrium value. So in this figure, I had shown two sine waves or two signals. Equilibrium value is 0. Okay, the equilibrium value is 0 volt here. And for the red color wave, you can see in the positive direction, its value changes from 0 to 1 volt. And in the negative direction also, its values changes from 0 to -1 volt. So it is a 1 volt peak to peak sine wave or 1 volt sine wave or 2 volt peak to peak sine wave. But for the second wave, you can see its amplitude is 2 volt in the positive direction. So amplitude means what is the deviation from this 0 value either to the positive direction or to the negative direction. So now I will be playing a sine wave or the sound. The first one is of amplitude 5 volt and the second wave with an amplitude of 100 volts. So this is a 5 volt sine wave. I don't know whether you can perceive it online correctly. Or else just think that we are increasing the loudness of our TV. So if we put it in 10, what we hear is of low sound. And if you increase the loudness to 30, just increase the amplitude. We are just increasing the amplitude in that case. So same is what happens when we increase the amplitude of a signal. So moving on, the next parameter is frequency. Frequency, as from the word we can understand, is what happens very frequently in a signal, or it is an event that repeats in a signal. Consider this example. I am taking a time duration, suppose 0 to 100 seconds. There are two waves or two signals in that specific time interval. The first signal, which is indicated by this red line, has a single cycle or a single event in that duration. An event means for this signal, its value changes from 0 to the positive value, positive highest value, then again to 0. Then it goes down and reaches the negative peak and again comes to 0. This is a single event in the signal. So this event repeats once, or this occurs only once in this specific time interval. Hence, the frequency of this wave is 1 Hz. But consider the case of this blue wave. Here also the event is, it starts from 0, reaches its positive maximum value, then again its negative, again comes to 0, then to its negative maximum, and again to 0. This is an event which repeats in this blue wave. How many times it repeats in this particular time interval? It repeats 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Hence, the frequency of this sine wave is 5 Hz. If a signal changes very fast in a particular time, its frequency is very high. But if the change is very slow, then its frequency will be very low. An important point to note is, if a signal does not change at all, its frequency is 0. For example, if we have a signal which is constant, its frequency is 0. But if a signal changes instantaneously, that is, if you have a signal like this, its frequency will be infinite. As an example, I will play first the sound of a 1000 Hz sine wave and then the sound of a 5000 Hz sine wave. So this is a 1000 Hz sine wave. So this is 5000 Hz sine wave. So you can see as the frequency increases, it's something like that is piercing into our eyes or pointing into our eyes. Our perception, ear's perception or sensitivity, as ma'am said, sensitivity is from 300 Hz to 3.3 kilohertz. So we can hear on correctly the sounds in that range. So as the frequency increases, the piercing effect into our eyes will increase. Now, the third parameter is wavelength. Wavelength is the distance between two similar points on two back-to-back waves. We can understand the concept of wavelength clearly from this diagram. The diagram shows a sine wave, and the point which is marked as 1, it indicates the positive peak value of two back-to-back waves. What is the distance between these 2 points? It is 0.2. Now consider the point 2. It is the starting point of two waves. What is the distance between these 2 points? It is again 0.2. Or consider the point 3. The point 3 indicates the negative maximum value of two consecutive waves. The distance between them is also 0.2. So wavelength means it is the distance between two similar points. Either we can take the distance between the points 1 or the points 2 or points 3. The only condition is that we should take the similar points on two waves. What is the distance between them? Wavelength is indicated by the distance between two similar points. Next parameter of a signal is the time period of the signal. Time period means how much time it takes to complete one cycle of the signal. So if in this figure we are considering one cycle represents this portion. So how much time it takes to complete this one cycle? It is the time period, and the reciprocal of the time period is the fundamental frequency. If T is the time period, then 1 by T indicates the fundamental frequency F. The unit of frequency is in hertz and time period is in seconds. So the fundamental frequency is the reciprocal of the time period T. Then the last parameter of a signal is the phase. Phase describes the position of the waveform with respect to time 0. Consider these three figures. In the first figure, the sine wave starts at t equal to 0, or the angle or the phase of the sine wave is 0 degrees. In the second figure, at time t equal to 0, the sine wave is at 90 degrees. So it has a phase shift of 90 degrees. In the third figure, at t equal to 0, the sine wave is at minus or 180 degrees. So the phase shift is 180. So phase means what is the position of the waveform at t equal to 0. Up to this slide, I had shown all the figures with respect to time axis. So we can represent a signal either in time domain or in frequency domain. Time domain representation means our x-axis is the time and y-axis is the amplitude. That is, our signal varies with respect to time, or the amplitude of our signal varies with respect to time. So the sine wave shown here has a frequency of 6 Hertz because in this particular time interval, it has 6 cycles and it has a peak value of 5 volt. So in the time domain representation, what we are representing is how our amplitude changes with respect to time. The same sine wave can be represented in frequency domain as shown in the second figure. Here the x-axis is the frequency axis and the y-axis is amplitude. So if we have to represent a sine wave of frequency 6 Hertz in frequency domain, what we have to show is just a simple spike at f is equal to 6 Hertz. And the amplitude of that spike is 5 volt, which is same as the amplitude of our sine wave. So a sine wave with frequency 6 Hertz and amplitude 5 volt can be represented by a single spike at f is equal to 6 Hertz in frequency domain. What is the advantage of moving from this time domain to this frequency domain representation? It will be clear when you see this figure. So the first one represents the time domain representation of 3 sine waves, each with frequency 0, 8, and 16. So this blue line, which is a constant value, it is a sine wave or a signal with frequency 0 hertz. And it has a value of 15 volts. Then you can see another sine wave, which is shown in this pink color. And in this particular time interval of 1 second, it has 8 number of cycles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So the frequency of this pink color wave is F is equal to 8 hertz. Now consider the third wave, which is indicated in this green color. So in this particular 1 second duration, it has a frequency of 16 hertz, or there are 16 number of cycles in this particular duration. So we are representing these 3 sine waves in time domain, how the value changes or how the amplitude changes with time. Suppose I have some 10 signals in order to represent in this time domain. So as you see, the amplitude will be varying for varying signals and the frequency will be varying. So the figure or our analysis will be difficult from this time domain representation. But if we move on to this frequency domain representation, how we can represent these 3 waves? The first wave, or it is indicated in blue, has a frequency of 0 hertz. So we need just a spike at F is equal to 0 and with amplitude 15 volts in order to indicate the amplitude of this wave. Now the pink one, which has a frequency of 8 hertz. So we have to draw just a spike at F is equal to 8 hertz and with the spike has an amplitude of 10 volt. And the green sine wave with frequency 16 hertz is indicated by this third spike and its amplitude is 5 volt. So our analysis will be easier in this frequency domain. That is why we use frequency domain techniques for analysis of speech signals. In our speech signal, in a practical case, it will consist of a large number of frequencies. And if we are going for this time domain analysis, it will be very difficult. So we will be moving on to frequency domain for analyzing these complex signals. The main classification of signal is analog signal and digital signal. Now we can see what are analog signals and what are digital signals. So an analog signal is the one which is continuous with time, or it changes continuously with respect to time. This is an example of an analog signal. Here you can see this is the time axis, or x-axis is the time axis. And the signal exists at each and every point in time. Suppose I take 1 second. The signal has a particular value of this much voltage. And if I take t as 2.5 seconds, here also the signal has some particular value. And if I take 3.775 seconds, again, our signal has a value. So at each and every point of time, our signal exists. So it is a continuous time signal. Continuous time signal means the signal exists at each and every point in time axis. And then what do you mean by this continuous amplitude signal? The amplitude of our signal is also continuous. Suppose at t equal to 1, I have 2.1 volt. Then at t equal to 2.5, it may have 3.7 volts. Then here it may have 0.5 volts. So the amplitude of the sine wave or our signal is continuous. So here for this analog signal, the time is also time and the amplitude both are continuous. So it is a continuous time, continuous amplitude signal. This is an example of analog signal. And all the signals which exist in nature or which occur naturally are analog in nature. Our speech or the sound produced by a bird or music, and everything is continuous or analog. Now the next classification is digital signal. Digital signal means it has values at discrete values, discrete time intervals or discrete amplitudes. So this is a digital signal. This is a continuous time signal. As I already mentioned, at each and every time point, it has some value, but the amplitude is discrete. The amplitude value may be either 0 volt or 1 volt. Suppose this is 1 second. So it has a value of 0 volt, and this is 1.5 second. It has a value of 1 volt. So the time axis is continuous here, but our amplitude axis is discrete. It can take only two possible values of voltage, either 0 or +5. This is known as continuous time discrete amplitude signal. Actually, we can have 4 types of signals according to this time and amplitude values. First one is an analog signal or continuous time, continuous amplitude signal, which is shown in this figure. Where the time axis is continuous, also our amplitude axis is continuous. The next classification is continuous time discrete amplitude signal. So here the time axis is continuous, but this wave can take only two values of amplitude, either +1 or -1. So this is discrete amplitude signal. Now look at the third figure. It shows a discrete time continuous amplitude signal. This is our time axis, and the signal exists only at discrete points of time. This is 0, this is 1, this is 3, this is 4. Like that, only at discrete values of time, the signal has an amplitude. But the amplitude value may be anything. It is not discrete. Suppose this is 1.1, this is -1.5, this is -1.8, like that. So the amplitude is continuous here, but the time value is discrete. So this third signal is a discrete time continuous amplitude signal. And the fourth one is a discrete time discrete amplitude signal. So here the time axis is discrete because the signal has values only at discrete time values, and the amplitude is discrete. So either the amplitude is 1 or -1. The amplitude can take only these two values. So the fourth one is an example of discrete time discrete amplitude signal, or we call it as a digital signal. So the digital signal exists only at discrete values of time, and its amplitude can also be discrete. But a continuous signal or an analog signal exists at each and every point of time, and the amplitude it can take is also continuous. That is the main difference between analog signal and digital signal. Just we can have a comparison between this analog and digital signal. The analysis is difficult for analog signal because it has infinite number of values. So the analysis is difficult, but for a digital signal, the values will be finite. So it is easier to analyze. Now the representation of an analog signal is continuous. For a digital signal, it is discontinuous, as we had seen in our previous diagram. And the analog signal has more accurate results because we are taking each and every value of that analog signal, and hence it will be more accurate. But the digital signal will have less accurate results compared to this analog signal. If we have to store this analog signal, we should have infinite memory, because the analog signal can take values like 1.1, 1.75, or 1.3745, etc. So the values are infinite. And hence, we need infinite memory to store an analog signal. But for a digital signal, as it has only discrete values, so the amplitude can either be +1 or -1, or +1 or 0. So it is easy to store this analog signal. Noise immunity is more for a digital signal. As we know, my signal can take only these two values, 1 and 0. So I can identify whether noise had affected my signal or not easily. So the noise immunity is more for a digital signal. The examples of analog signals are given here: human voice, thermometer, analog phones, etc. And digital signals, the examples are computers, digital phone, digital pens, etc. So these are some advantages of digital signal: noise immunity, error detection, use of multiplexing and all. That's why we are moving from analog to digital for analysis and processing. So as our digital signals has these much advantages, how can we convert an analog signal into a digital signal? As I said, all the signals which occur naturally are analog in nature. But for the analysis and processing, I need a digital signal. So there should be some method to change this analog signal into a digital signal. So how can we change? Suppose this is an analog signal which I have, and I want to change this analog signal into a digital signal. So digital signal means it should have values at discrete time intervals. So what I should do is just take samples from this analog signal at some time duration. Suppose I am taking the value of signal at t equal to 0. And the value of signal is suppose 1 volt. And I am taking it as my first sample. And I represented here it in this figure. Now, the next sample which I am taking is at t equal to 1 second. Suppose my value is 0.9 volt. And I indicated it here. The next sample which I am taking is at t equal to 2 seconds. It is 0.7. Likewise, I should take samples at some particular time intervals. Now, my analog signal has converted into a discrete time signal. So in order to convert an analog signal into a digital signal, what should I do? I should take samples at some particular time intervals. This time interval, which I am used for sampling, is known as TS, or the sampling interval. Now you can see, just by doing sampling, my analog signal is converted into a discrete time signal. But here also, my amplitude is continuous, or the amplitude value is not discrete here. So in order to convert this signal into a digital signal, I want to discretize my amplitude too. So there are two processes in order to convert an analog signal into digital signal. First step is the sampling, and the second step is known as quantization. Okay, so I will explain this sampling and quantization with a figure. Suppose I have a signal like this, and I'm doing sampling in the signal. So in the process of sampling, what I do is I will take values at some specific time intervals. So my signal had changed into something like this, just by doing sampling. And for storage purposes and all, I am using these discrete values and I am storing these discrete values for storage, that storing my signal. And I should be able to reconstruct my original analog signal from this discrete signal. Suppose I am storing my speech in a flash memory and I am storing some samples of my speech. And by using an MP3 player, I should be able to reconstruct my original sound. So while taking sampling, care should be taken that the reconstruction process is accurate. So how can we make sure the reconstruction is appropriate? Suppose this is my signal and I am taking only 3 samples of my signal here at t equal to -1 and at t equal to 0 and at t equal to +1. So my discrete value will be looking like this. I had only 3 values. So while reconstructing or while converting again back to analog signal, I can join this like this, or it may be something like this. So my reconstruction will not be correct or accurate. My sound may change on reproduction. This should not be our final result. So I should take sufficient number of samples from my original signal in order to preserve our information. So what is the sufficient number of sampling or sample values, sampling number? It is given by Nyquist sampling theorem. If our signal frequency is FM, the sampling frequency Fs should always be greater than or equal to 2FM. This theory is proposed by Nyquist. So if FM is our maximum signal frequency in our message or our original signal, we should sample at least twice that maximum value in order to reconstruct our signal correctly. So this is the statement of that Nyquist. Fh should always be greater than or equal to 2FM. This is my sine wave and these are my sampling duration, sampling signals. So these sampling signals should have a frequency Fs which is greater than or equal to 2FM. Then only I can reconstruct my signal back from this discrete signal. Okay, so the first process in converting the analog signal into digital is sampling. And while doing sampling, I am converting my continuous time, continuous amplitude signal into, so this signal, this sine wave is continuous time and continuous in amplitude. So after sampling, the result I obtained is discrete in time, but it is continuous in amplitude. The amplitude value is continuous in nature. Now the next step is I want to discretize this amplitude axis too. So that process is known as quantization. So quantization maps the elements of continuous set into a finite set. The input to the quantizer or the quantization stage is a discrete time continuous value signal. After quantization, I should obtain a discrete time discrete valued signal. So here is an example. Suppose I have a sine wave like this, and I had done sampling for that sine wave, and my discrete value after sampling, my result is somewhat like this. I had converted this analog signal into this discrete time signal by sampling. And I am quantizing this signal now, or I am giving this signal as the input to a quantizer. What it do is, it will convert all the positive values into +1. Or whenever the amplitude is positive, it will represent it as +1. So here all the values are represented as +1. And whenever the value is negative, it is represented as -1. This is just a simple form of quantizer. So my continuous amplitude signal had now converted into a discrete amplitude signal. Whenever my value is positive, I am representing it by +1. And whenever my value is negative, I am representing it with -1. This is what the quantizer do. It will convert the continuous amplitude into discrete amplitude. The quantizer can also be complex. Here I had taken only two values, +1 and -1. There are many quantizers which represent our signal using more than these two levels. Suppose this is my sine wave, which I had sampled. This value is 0.1. This is 0.2. This is 0.3. Here it is again 0.2. This is 0.1. So I have a sine wave like this, and I sampled that sine wave. And my quantizer represents the values from 0 to 0.1 by 0 volt. And the values from 0.1 to 0.2 by 1 volt. And 0.2 to 0.3 by 2 volt. Suppose this is my quantizer. So how will the quantizer output be? So my signal has a value 0 from this for this time. So the quantizer output will be like this from 0 to 1, as it produces 0 volt for all the values from 0 to 0.1. And from t equal to 1 to 2, my value is just 0.1. So it will produce a 1 volt here. Then at t equal to 2, my value is 0.2. So it will be moving to 2 volt. So this is an example of a quantizer which has 3 levels. Like that, if I want, I can have more levels for representation. That depends on my accuracy. In the previous case, I had only +1 and -1. So I represented all positive values using +1 and all negative values using -1. But here I have many values or many digits or many levels for representing this positive case, and I can have more accurate results. Now we had covered the broad classification of signals into analog and digital, and there are many other classifications too. First one is even signal and odd signal. An even signal is the one in which x of minus t equal to x of t for all t. If x of t is my original signal, and for all values of t, if x of minus t equal to x of t, then the signal is even. Take the figure shown here. This is my signal x of t. Suppose for that figure, take x of -1. What is the value of x of -1? It is 0.5. What is the value of x of 1? It is again 0.5. So x of -1 is equal to x of 1. Like that, for this signal, for every value of t, x of minus t is equal to x of t, and hence this signal is an even signal. So an even signal will always be symmetric about this vertical axis. You can see symmetricity about this vertical axis. It will be symmetrical. Okay. But the figure shown here is an odd signal. So what is an odd signal? If x of minus t equal to minus x of t for all t. Suppose for this figure, what is the value of x of -1? X of -1 is -0.5. And what is the value of x of 1? It is 0.5. So we can write x of -1 is equal to minus x of 1. So this is an odd signal. So the signal will be identical to its negative half. Now the next classification is periodic and non-periodic signal. As from the word, a periodic signal is one which occur periodically. We can write it mathematically as x of t equal to x of t plus t. That is, it repeats at every t time intervals. This is an example of a periodic signal. So this is one period which lasts for 0.2 seconds. And this period repeats at every 0.2 seconds. So this is a periodic signal with a period 0.2 seconds. But the second figure, which is just a square wave and it lasts for this t1 duration only. So it is a non-periodic signal. So periodic signal is the one which repeats periodically and the period is indicated by this capital T. Now the next classification is causal signal and non-causal signal. I will show you one figure and it will be easier to understand. So this figure shows a causal signal, which means a causal signal is the one which exists for t greater than 0. Only for positive values of time, this signal exists. A non-causal signal is the one which exists for both positive and negative values of time. And an anti-causal signal is the one which exists for negative values of time. So all our natural signals will of course be causal because it exists only for positive values of time. And the next classification is deterministic and random signals. A deterministic signal is the one in which we have no uncertainty. Suppose we have a sine wave of frequency 100 Hertz. We know the sine signal is represented by sine 2 pi ft. And the frequency we know it is 100. And at t equal to 0, I can of course say what is the value of my signal because it is deterministic. But a random signal is the one which we cannot predict its value at any time. So this is an EEG signal. I cannot predict what will be the value of EEG signals at t equal to 5. It is a random signal. Or the noise which occur in this atmosphere is random in nature. I cannot predict in particular what will be the value of the noise at a particular time instant. So the signals can be classified as deterministic and random. So these are all about the classification of signals. And there are some elementary signals which we use for analysis in signal processing. One is a unit step function. This is a signal, unit step signal. And this is what which exists from, it has a positive value or it has a value of 1 for t greater than 0 and has a value 0 for t less than 0. A signal like this is known as a unit step signal or a unit step function. It is indicated by this u of t and u of t equal to 1 for t greater than 0 and u of t equal to 0 for t less than 0. And it is a continuous time unit step signal. The time axis is continuous here and we can have its discrete counterpart too. And for a discrete unit step function, u of n equal to 1. All the discrete signals we are representing its time axis with the letter n. U of t means it is continuous in time and u of n means it is discrete in time. That is a way of representation or standard way of representation. So for a discrete time version of unit step signal, u of n equal to 1 for n greater than or equal to 0 and u of n equal to 0 for n less than 0. So unit step is one of the elementary signals. The next one is an unit impulse function. The unit impulse function in time domain means the signal exists only at t equal to 0. And at t equal to 0, it has infinite amplitude. The amplitude of the signal is infinite at t equal to 0. And the signal has a value 0 everywhere. The unit impulse function is represented by this letter delta of t, and delta of t equal to 0 for t not equal to 0, and it has an amplitude infinity at t equal to 0. And the area of this unit impulse function is 1. It is also known as a Dirac delta function. So if we are assuming this unit impulse function as a pulse, there are some points to be noted. The width of the pulse is 0. That is, the pulse exists only at t equal to 0. And the height of the pulse is infinity. And the area under the pulse is unity. That is what a unit impulse function in continuous time domain means. While we are moving to discrete time domain, the unit impulse is denoted by delta of n. And the only difference is that here its amplitude is equal to 1 at n equal to 0. As in continuous time domain case, the signal exists only at n equal to 0, but the amplitude will be equal to 1 there. And all other points, the amplitude is 0. So delta of n is the discrete time version of our unit impulse signal. Now the third elementary signal is a unit ramp signal, which is indicated by r of t, and r of t equal to t for t greater than or equal to 0 and 0 for t less than 0. This is our unit ramp signal, and this is its discrete counterpart, r of n equal to n for n greater than or equal to 0 and 0 otherwise. So for our analysis of signals, we may be using these elementary signals. Most probably we are using this impulse signal for the analysis. And we can have a successive integration figure of these elementary signals. So the first one is our impulse signal. And on integrating this impulse signal over the entire t, we get our unit step signal. And integrating this u of t, we will get our ramp signal r of t. Again, integrating r of t, it produces the unit parabola signal, and so on. And the reverse is also true. If we differentiate r of t, we get u of t. And if we differentiate u of t, we get delta of t, or our unit impulse signal. Then this is the basic sinusoidal signal, and it is represented as a cos omega 0 t plus phi, where omega 0 is the time period or the periodicity. Now, what are the basic operations we are doing on these signals? Now, we had seen the classification. What are the types of signals? And what are the elementary signals? So now, what are the operations on these signals? The operations can be classified into operations on dependent variable and the operations on independent variable. So the dependent variable means its amplitude or the value which changes according to time, and the independent variable is the time here. So the first operation is amplitude scaling. Amplitude scaling means if x of t is one of our signal and we just multiply it with a constant, its amplitude changes. So our y of t equal to c into x of t. So the figure is shown here. The blue figure shows a sine wave of value 1 volt, maximum value 1. And if you multiply it with 5 into sine, which produces the red signal here. It has an amplitude of 5 volt. This is just the amplitude scaling operation. And an example of a device that uses amplitude scaling is a simple amplifier. Now the next one is the addition operation. Suppose we have two signals, x1 of t and x2 of t. Just by adding these two, it produces the third signal, y1 of t. So here the first example, I had taken two sine waves. First one, which is indicated in this blue color, it has an amplitude of 1 volt and a frequency of 100 hertz. And the second sine wave has the same frequency, which is equal to 100 hertz, but its amplitude is 2 volt. Then by doing this addition operation, we get our result, and the frequency is same here, 100 hertz, but my amplitude, the maximum value had changed to 3 volt. So this is just the addition operation of two sine waves with same frequency. But if we have sine waves with different frequencies, suppose the blue color is my sine wave with 100 hertz frequency and an amplitude of 1 volt. And the second one, the red color indicates a sine wave of 200 hertz and an amplitude of 2 volt. What will happen if I add these two signals? The resultant output will be like this. In a particular time duration, there will be both 100 hertz and 200 hertz sine wave. Now, the third operation is multiplication. Multiplication means we are multiplying x1 of t into x2 of t. This multiplication operation is incorporated in AM radio signal or modulation techniques. So this is the result of my multiplication operation, x1 of t into x2 of t. And the fourth operation is differentiation. We are differentiating our signal. Suppose this is our sine wave. On doing differentiation operation, we will get a cosine wave. And the fifth one is integration. We have a sign, we get minus cos as the result of integration operation. So these are the basic operations on dependent variable, and our interest is on the operations on independent variables. We use these operations in order to analyze signals. The first operation is time scaling. So here we are manipulating our independent variable. So time scaling, we are producing the output y of t, which is a scaled version of x of t, x of at. So here is an example. Suppose my input signal x of t is like this, which is a triangular signal which exists from -1 to 1. And my y of t is x of 2t. That is, I had multiplied t with 2. What will happen to my x? See, we can write it. What will be y of 0? Y of 0 will be equal to x of 2 into 0. That is x of 0 is equal to 1. What will be y of 1 by 2? X of 2 into 1 by 2, that is equal to x of 1, which is 1. Sorry, 0. Then what will be y of 1? Y of 1 will be equal to x of 2 into 1, that is equal to x of 2, which is 0. So our signal has compressed to 1 by 2 by doing this scaling operation. Or just take the points in between and compute the values of y using this equation. we can see that our signal had compressed. Our original signal exists from t equal to -1 to +1. But here our signal exists only from t equal to -1/2 to 2 equal to +1/2. Now suppose our a value is equal to 1/2. My y of t equal to x of 1/2 t. In that case, if I am computing the value of y of t, I can see that the signal had expanded. That is, the signal exists from -2 to 2. That is what I had indicated in this slide. If the value of a is greater than 1, it is known as signal compression, or the time duration in which that signal exists, it had reduced. If my value of a is between 0 and 1, the signal will expand, or the time duration had increased. So this is the time scaling operation. If my scaling factor is greater than 1, the signal will be compressed. And if my scaling factor is between 0 and 1, my signal will be expanded. The second operation is time shifting, which means my y of t, or the output, is equal to x of t minus t0. So this is my x of t. The figure shows an example of my x of t. It has a value +1 from -1/2 to +1/2. Now you can find out the shifted version of y of t just by substituting each and every value of t here. What will be y of 0? Y of 0 is equal to x of 0 minus 2. That is x of -2. X of -2 is, of course, 0. What will be y of 1? That is x of 1 minus 2. That is x of -1. It is again 0. Then what will be y of 3/2? That is x of 3/2 minus 2, which is equal to x of -1/2. And this is again equal to 0. What will be y of 2? Y of 2 is x of 2 minus 2. That is x of 0, which is equal to 1. So my signal starts here. The maximum value is here. So by doing x of t minus 2, my signal has shifted by 2 units to the right. So if t0 is greater than 0, it is a right shift. And if t0 is less than 0, the signal will be shifted to left. So this is the basic time shifting operation. Y of t equal to x of t minus 2 means my original signal will be shifted by 2 units to the right by doing this time shifting operation. Or the original signal starts at t equal to -1/2. Now my shifted signal starts only at t equal to 3/2. I had delayed my signal here. So right shift means delaying and left shift means advancing. This is a discrete time example for shifting operation. And here my t0 value is negative. T0 is -3, and hence my signal had advanced by 3 time units. The value which was originally in -2, I will get it at -5. So my signal had advanced, as it is a left shift operation. Now the last operation is time reversal. The time reversal means a reflection with respect to t equal to 0. So if my original signal looks like this, the x of t, and the shifted version looks just like the mirror image about vertical axis. You can also call this time reversal as folding operation. Folding with respect to y-axis. So these are all about signals. So we had seen what is the formal definition of a signal, what are the types, how we can convert an analog signal into a digital signal, what are the elementary signals we have, and what are the basic operations on these signals. Now we are moving on to our second half, a system. As in the beginning, I said an MP3 player is a system which converts one signal to another. So a system can be defined as a black box which has an input and an output. So it receives some input signal and does some operation on that input signal and produces another output. The input is known as the excitation and the output is known as the response. So it receives an input signal and it do something in that input and produces an output. So what does this system do? What is inside this black box? That is important for a system. So the function of that system can be characterized by a mathematical equation, or it can be represented as the ratio of output to input. Suppose I say I am producing an input x of t to my system, and my system multiplies this x of t by 2. Whatever will be the input, my system multiplies it by 2. Then my y of t will be equal to 2x of t. So what is my system doing? It will accept an input signal and multiply the input signal by 2 and produces an output signal. So I can always represent a system just as the multiplication of something with my input, or I can represent it as the ratio of output to input. This fraction or this ratio is known as the transfer function, which is a property of our system, or the transfer function indicates what my system does on this input signal. Systems can also be characterized into a number. First one is, as like in the case of signals, we can have continuous time system and discrete time system. So for a continuous time system, my input and the output are both continuous time signals. Input will be x of t, which is a continuous time signal, and the output y of t will of course be another continuous time signal. But my system do some operation on this input and produces an output. So for a discrete time system, my input is x of n, which is a discrete signal, and the output is again another discrete signal y of n. So a discrete time system operates on discrete signals, and a continuous time system operates on continuous signals. Again, my systems can be classified into 6, which is very important for our signal processing application. First one is a linear system and a nonlinear system. In order to understand what is a linear system, we should understand two principles: superposition principle and homogeneity principle. What is superposition principle? It says that suppose I have a system and I am giving the signal x1 as the input to the system. Suppose my output in that case is y1. And to the same system, I am giving another input x2, and my output in that case is indicated by y2. And as the third case, into the same system, I am given a sum of x1 and x2 as the input. So if my output is equal to y1 plus y2, it satisfies the superposition theorem or the superposition principle. Suppose I have an input x1 and my system produces output y1 corresponding to this x1, and corresponding to the signal s2, my system produces y2. So if I am giving a sum of x1 and x2 into my system, my output should be equal to y1 plus y2. In that case, my system satisfies superposition principle. And what is homogeneity principle? Suppose to the system, I am giving a signal x of t and my output is y of t. And if to the same system, I am giving a signal a into x of t, that is my input is multiplied by a, then my output should be equal to a into y of t. Okay, this is homogeneity principle. So a system satisfying both superposition and homogeneity is known as a linear system. So we can write the equation of a linear system as t. T indicates the function which my system does, or the transfer function of my system. So t of a1 x1 plus a2 x2. So here I had multiplied my input x1 with a1 and added with a2 x2. So corresponding to the signal x1, my output is y1, and corresponding to the signal x2, my output is y2. So the transfer function of a1 x1 of t plus a2 x2 of t should be equal to a1 y1 of t plus a2 y2 of t. That is, the response to the system should be equal to the response of individual inputs. Response means our output. So I am giving a complex signal the input, which is a sum of x1 and x2, and my output is just the individual responses, sum of that individual responses. X1 is my one input signal and x2 is my another input signal. If I am giving x1 to my system, my output is y1. If I am giving x2 to my system, my output is y2. And I am giving a combination of x1 and x2 to my system. Then my output should be equal to the sum of individual responses, that it should be equal to a1 y1 plus a2 y2. If my system satisfies this condition, my system is said to be linear. Okay, so for a linear system, the response or the overall response should be equal to the sum of individual responses. So this linear system plays a very important role in signal processing applications, because if I have a very complex signal at my input, and if I know that my system is linear, I can easily calculate my output, because my output will be equal to the sum of individual responses. Now the next property of a system is time or shift invariant system. As from the word which we can understand, a time invariant system means, suppose I have a signal x of t, and corresponding to that x of t, my output is y of t. And now I am delaying my input by t0 seconds. And that is, I am giving the input as x of t minus t0. Then my output should also be delayed by that same t0 seconds. The output should also be equal to y of t minus t0. If my system satisfies this condition, my system is said to be time invariant. Here, the same concept is written in mathematical form. Suppose my output is gi of x, which is a function of fi of x. Fi is my input. And I am shifting this x, fi of x by fi of x plus x0. So my output should be equal to h of fi of x plus x0. If I am delaying my input, my output should also delay by that same duration. In that case, my system is said to be time invariant. A shift in the independent variable should cause the same shift at the output. Then the next one is static and dynamic system. Static system means which is stable or which is memoryless. An example is given here. Suppose I have a system which has an input output relation given by y of t equal to 2x of t. So here, suppose t equal to 0. So y of 0 depends only on x of 0. Y of 1 depends only on x of 1. So it does not need any past values of x or future values of x in order to compute the present value. Y of 1 is equal to 2 into x of 1. We don't have to know x of 0 or x of minus 1 or x of 3 in order to compute this y of 1. The present value depends only on the present input. In that case, my system is said to be memoryless or static. But a dynamic system means my present value depends on past values. So there is an example. Suppose my system is represented by y of t equal to 2x of t plus 3x of t minus 3. Suppose I have to calculate y of 0. What will be the value of y of 0? It is 2x of 0 plus 3 into x of minus 3. So in order to compute the value of my output at t equal to 0, I should know what was my input at t equal to minus 3. Okay, so my present output depends on some past values. So here my system is dynamic, or my system should have memory in order to compute the final result. It is a system with memory or a dynamic system. Now I have another classification, causal and non-causal system. A causal system means my present output depend only on present and past input, not on future input. Okay, I will explain with an example. Suppose this is my system, y of t equal to 2x of t plus 3x of t minus 3. Suppose I have to calculate y of minus 3. Y of minus 3 equal to 2 into x of minus 3 plus 3 into x of minus 6. So in order to compute my output at t equal to minus 3, I should know the value of my inputs at t equal to minus 3 and t equal to minus 6. So I need only present and past values of my input in order to compute my present output. But consider the second case. Here y of t equal to 2 into x of t plus 3 into x of t plus 3. So what will be the value of y of minus 3? Y of minus 3 equal to 2 into x of minus 3 plus 3 into x of 0. So here in this case, in order to compute my value or my output value at t equal to minus 3, I should know my input value at t equal to minus 3. No problem, because I know what is my present input. But I should also know what is x of 0. At t equal to minus 3, x of 0 is a future value, or t equal to 0 is a future value. So in order to compute the value of output at t equal to minus 3, I should have the knowledge of my input at t equal to 0. So I need some future value. In that case, my system is non-causal. So our causal signal and non-causal signals are there. It is different from this. Causal signal exists only for t greater than 0. And my causal system means the present output should depend only on past values of input and present value of input. All realizable systems are causal in nature. We cannot realize a non-causal system because we are unable to find the value of the input at a future point. So we cannot realize a non-causal system practically. All realizable systems are causal in nature. Now the next classification is invertible and non-invertible systems. A system is said to be invertible if the input of the system appears at the output. Suppose I have a system H1 which does multiplication by 2. This is our input signal x of t, and our system h of t multiplies this by 2. And I can have another system H2 which divides this by 2 so that I can retrieve my original signal x of t at my output. So my system is invertible here. My first system multiplies the signal by 2, and I have an inverse system which divides the signal by 2 so as to retrieve my x of t. So my input is available as such at the output. In that case, my system is invertible. Now, the last classification is stable and unstable systems. A system is said to be stable if I had given a bounded input, it produces a bounded output. What do you mean by a bounded input signal and a bounded output signal? Bounded input means its amplitude should be finite if I am summing from minus infinity to infinity. Its amplitude should not go to infinity. That is a bounded input signal. So if I am giving a bounded input signal to a system and the output is again a bounded signal, then the system is said to be stable. So consider this system which produces an output y of n equal to r raised to n into x of n. X of n is my input and y of n is my output. And the system is represented by this equation y of n equal to r raised to n into x of n. And the value of r is given as greater than 1. And suppose that my input is bounded, that is the value of x of n is always less than infinity. Even though my x of n is bounded, as the value of n increases, this r of n may go to infinity because the r value is always greater than 1. Hence, r of n value will diverge as n increase. So this system is an unstable system. Even though my input is bounded, my output may go to unbounded state as this r of n value will become very large as n increases. That is, my y of 2 may be less than infinity, y of 3 may be less than infinity, but I approaches as I increase y of 1000 will be equal to r of 1000, r raised to 1000. If r value is much greater than 1, this value will increase, and as n increases, my output will go to infinity. So this is an unstable system. But y of t equal to x square of t, and I am giving the unit step signal, which has a value of 1 always as the input, and the output will always be equal to 1. So it is a stable system. Now we had seen the classification of systems, and for signal processing applications, we had a special interest in a particular type of systems, that is a linear time invariant system. So a linear time invariant system means a system which satisfies both linearity and time invariance. So why we are concentrating on this linear time invariant system or LTI system in short? Because all our practical phenomena can be represented as an LTI system. And also there is another advantage that if we know our system is LTI, we can compute the output to any input signal. Whatever be my input signal, I can compute the output easily. That is why we are especially interested in this LTI system. If we have a linear time invariant system in my hand, then whatever be the input to that system, I can easily compute my output. In order to compute the output of an LTI system, I should first understand what is an impulse response. So an impulse response, as from the name indicates, it is the output corresponding to an impulse signal at the input. Impulse response. Response always means the output. So the output of an LTI system corresponding to an unit impulse signal. It is known as an impulse response, and it is indicated by h of t in continuous case and h of n in discrete case. So if we know the impulse response of an LTI system, we can easily compute the output for any input. So how can we do that? This is indicated by this convolution sum and convolution integral. So for that, suppose this is our system. This is an LTI. This is our system. And I had given an unit impulse signal as an input to this system. And my output be like this. And now I am shifting my impulse signal by lambda units. So in the first case, I had given an unit impulse signal. So unit impulse signal means it exists only at t equal to 0. So while the input is an unit impulse signal, my output looks like this. Suppose this is our system and my system produces an output like this for delta of t. If I am shifting my impulse signal by lambda units and given as input to this same LTI system, my output will also get delayed by this lambda. Why? Because my system is time invariant. The time invariance property says that if I delay the input by t0 units, my output will also get delayed by t0 units. So as my system is time invariant, if I am shifting my impulse by lambda units and given as input to this system, my output will also get delayed by this lambda units. Okay, this is an impulse response of an LTI system and its property. Now we can see how can we compute the output corresponding to an input for an LTI system. Suppose our input x of t to an LTI system is as shown in figure, which is a complex signal. We cannot call it as a sine wave or we cannot call it as a constant value. It is a mixture of some values. And suppose this is our input to an LTI system. And this is my impulse response h of t. H of t means I have a system in my hand and I am giving an unit impulse as the input. Then my system produces an output like this. This is what I know previously or what I found out. And I have a system like this in my hand and I am giving this input to my system. What will be the output? I want to compute that. I don't know the output corresponding to this particular input. I want to compute the output corresponding to this input. But what I know about my system is the impulse response or the output corresponding to an impulse. So by using this linearity and time shifting property of the system, we can compute the output. For that, this is the blue color indicates my input, and I am discretizing my continuous input by using this pulses. I'm using pulses of width 0.8 duration in order to represent my continuous time signal. Okay. And again, I am approximating by using impulses. So this is the first impulse. This is the second impulse. This is the third one, fourth one, fifth one, and sixth one. So I'm approximating my input signal X using these 6 impulses. The impulse has an area of 0.8, which is equal to the width of my rectangular signal. Here also I had taken a rectangular pulse of 0.8 seconds. Okay, I'm taking, or else you can consider as taking impulses at an interval of 0.8, and I'm representing my signal using these impulses. If I am giving the first impulse alone as the input to my system, what will be the output? I'm giving this impulse, the first impulse, to my system alone. Do not consider the remaining 5. So if my input to the system is this impulse, what will be the output? I know my impulse response. So as my system is linear, it should satisfy the superposition and homogeneity principle. That is, I had multiplied my input by a value equal to 1, or I had multiplied my impulse with a value equal to 1. So my output should also get multiplied by the same value. So the output corresponding to an impulse is this one, which is indicated in yellow color. And as I had multiplied my signal or my impulse with an amplitude 1 volt, my output will also get scaled by the same factor. Here, this total figure is scaled by a factor of 1/2, and hence maximum value 3 is indicated as 1.5 here, just a scaled version. Now, consider the second impulse. So the second impulse, suppose, occurs at t equal to 1. So I had delayed the impulse by t equal to 1. So as my system is time invariant, if I delay my impulse by t equal to 1, my impulse response or the output will also get delayed by 1 unit. And here I am scaling my impulse. Suppose this value is 1.4. So I am scaling this by a factor 2. So my output should also get scaled by the same factor. So for the second impulse, my output, it should start at t equal to 1 because it is a shifted impulse, and its value will get scaled to say some 1.4 volts. Like that, corresponding to each and every impulse, I calculate the output. I know the impulse response for my system, and I am representing my input signal as a sum of impulses. And for each impulse, I am calculating the output. Okay, so this is my impulse response, or this is the output corresponding to an impulse signal. What I do is, I am representing my input signal x of t as a series of impulses, or as a sum of scaled and shifted impulses. And I'm calculating the output corresponding to each and every impulse. As my system is linear and shift invariant, I can easily calculate the output corresponding to each and every one of the impulse. And now, what I should do finally to obtain the output is just add these outputs, because my system satisfies superposition principle as it is linear. So the combined output will be equal to the sum of individual outputs. Hence, the total output is indicated in this black color, which is the sum of these 6 outputs. Now, in order to verify whether my result is correct, I had done it in using a software, MATLAB. So in MATLAB, this is the first output which I had done using MATLAB. And here the time duration between impulse is 0.8, as I had said. And the output is indicated by this green. And if I'm decreasing the time interval between impulses, that is, I'm approximating more accurately, I get more accurate result. Okay, as the time duration, as the time between these impulses decrease, my result will be more accurate because my signal can be represented more accurately using more number of impulses, and hence my output will be more accurate. So what convolution does is that it computes the output by using the impulse response. So what I had shown in this figure will be written in the form of an equation in order to find an mathematical equation for this convolution sum. Suppose my unit impulse is indicated by delta of t, and the impulse response is h of t. If I am delaying this impulse by a time I into delta of t, I'm delaying my input delta of t by a unit I into delta of t, then the corresponding output should also get delayed by the same unit, as my system is time invariant. So my impulse response will be h of t minus I into delta t in that case. And if the impulse has an area of A and it is delayed by I into delta of t, using homogeneity principle, my output will be A into h of t minus I into delta of t. Now I have a function f of t, which has a value f of I into delta t at t equal to I into delta t. Suppose my function is like this. This is my f of t. And at time instant I into delta of t, the function value is f of I into delta t. Now this is my impulse. And for that impulse, the corresponding output will be f of I into delta of t into h of t minus I into delta of t. Same concept. I have an impulse at I into delta t, which has a value f of I into delta t. So the width of the pulse is delta t and the height is f of I into delta t. So the area will be f of I into delta t into delta t, length into breadth. So if I am giving this impulse as an input to my LTI system, the corresponding output will be f of I into delta t, then my impulse response will be shifted by this one, h of t minus I into delta t. In order to get accurate results, I should take delta t tends to 0. So as delta t tends to 0, I can write the summation as integral 0 to t f of lambda into h of t minus lambda d lambda. This is the basic convolution operation, or this is the convolution theorem. So if I know my input and I know my impulse response, I can calculate the output as a sum of impulse responses shifted and scaled. That is what convolution theorem says. So for signal processing applications, for all applications, we will be considering this LTI system because of this property. Whatever may be the input, I can find out the output using this impulse response alone. Now this is the convolution operation, and along with that, I want to describe another operation which is known as correlation, which will be used in this afternoon session for explaining signal analysis. So correlation convolution means we are using two signals. One is our input signal and another one is our impulse response in order to calculate our output. But in correlation, we are finding out the similarity of a signal with respect to the same, or we want to measure the similarity which exists between these signals. So there are two types of correlation: autocorrelation and cross correlation. Autocorrelation means how much similarity exists between a signal and a time shifted version of the same signal. Suppose I have a signal like this, which starts at t equal to 0, and the same signal I am shifted by 2 units at t equal to 2. How much correlation exists between these two? This is known as autocorrelation. We are mainly using this autocorrelation in noise analysis because the same signal may be affected by noise after some time. So in order to analyze this noise characteristics, we are concentrating on autocorrelation. This is an example of autocorrelation. This is my signal, -1, 2, 1. Suppose I have some discrete values, -1, 2, 1. This is my x of n. I want to find the autocorrelation of x of n. What I do, I should shift and add. So first of all, I'm shifting it by 3, or I'm shifting it to the leftmost position, the same signal, and multiply these two, -1 and 1. I get the result -1. Then shift it by 1 unit. So it will, the x of n will go here. Again, multiply these two. So -1 into 2 yield -2. 2 into 1 yields 2. And add these two values. So my value will be 0. Again, shift it and multiply. So -1 into -1, 1. 2 into 2, 4. 1 into 1, 1. So I get the correlation coefficient as 6. Again, shift and repeat the process. And here in this example, my correlation coefficients are -1, 0, 6, 0, and -1 of x of n with x of n. You can see the maximum value of correlation coefficient exists when these two signals overlap exactly. That is x of n and the shifted version of x of n, when they coincide, I will have the maximum value of correlation coefficient. That means in this time or time interval, or in that particular time instant, I have maximum correlation, or my two signals are exactly the same in that time instant. Now, cross correlation means we are finding out the similarity of a signal with another signal. So this is an example showing cross correlation. -3, 2, -1, 1 is our x of n, and I am correlating with y of n, which is -1, 0, -3, 2. The same way, I'm shifting, multiplying, and adding. And here in this example, I had a maximum value of 13, which is obtained when 2 bits or 2 values of xn and yn are same, or there is maximum correlation, maximum similarity between xn and yn. So here also the maximum value of correlation coefficient is obtained when there is maximum similarity between these two signals. So a correlation is used to find out the degree of similarity between two signals. If we are finding out the similarity between a same signal and a shifted version of the same signal, it is known as autocorrelation. And if we are finding out the similarity of a signal with another signal, it is known as cross correlation. Now my last topic is for an LTI system, where there are some characteristics. We had seen what is an LTI system and how to compute the output of an LTI system. So LTI system is said to be memoryless. So initially I had seen I had told you what is a memoryless system or what is a static system. The present output should depend only on the present value of input. In that case, our system is known as static. But for an LTI system, we can define this memoryless condition easily using this impulse response. That is, the impulse response should be equal to 0 for t not equal to 0. That is, our impulse response should exist only at t equal to 0. It should be 0 everywhere other than t equal to 0. In that case, our system is memoryless. So, for an LTI system to be memoryless, our impulse response h of t should be non-zero only at t equal to 0, and h of t should be equal to 0 elsewhere. If this condition is satisfied, our LTI system is memoryless. Or as our h of t exists only at t equal to 0, we can write it as c into delta of t, because delta of t exists only at t equal to 0. Then for an LTI system to be causal, we know a system is causal when the present output depends only on present input and past input. It should not depend on future values. And the same condition we can represent using impulse response as h of t should be equal to 0 for t less than 0. That is, for an LTI system to be causal, its impulse response should be equal to 0 for t less than 0. Suppose you are told that you have an LTI system whose impulse response is like this. Will this system be causal? No, because its h of t is not equal to 0 for t less than 0. So for a system to be causal, its impulse response should be equal to 0 for t less than 0. And the last one is stability. And for our LTI system to be stable, integral minus infinity to infinity modulus of h of t dt should be less than infinity. This is the condition for stability using impulse response. Earlier, we had defined stability that if my input is bounded, my output should also be bounded. But if my system is LTI and I know its impulse response, I can easily check whether my system is stable by using this condition. So these are the properties of an LTI system and how we are finding out the output corresponding to an LTI system, and how we can find out the properties using this impulse response. So this is what I want to cover in this session. If you have any doubt, please ask me.
Thank you, Gayatri ma'am. Dear participants, if you have any query, you can ask. The time for interaction, please ask your queries. Just raise your hand and we can unmute you. Any queries? I'm very happy to thank you, Gayatri ma'am, for this wonderful session. This session met all the needs of this particular webinar, because as I mentioned earlier, we majority are beginners in this area of signal processing. Hence, we got a nice introduction about what is signal and the system. The session was well organized and very simple. It's very easy to understand all the basics very clearly. So I have noted down some of the points, and I have a doubt that you mentioned that causal system is a realizable system. Please give me any example for realizable system, ma'am.
a realizable system. Suppose, ma'am, we are taking the example of an MP3 player. So,
Okay,
and if that is, we want to reproduce the information stored in our memory in the form of sound waves.
okay,
So, and I am giving that binary data as the input to my MP3 player, and I am starting from t equal to 0. So my output should, or my system should be able to produce the output using the values which I had given. It should not wait, or it should not depend on future values to come in order to compute my present output. So if we want to realize my system, if my system is depending on future values, I should have to wait and see what are the values coming after this, and I have to compute that output. It is not realizable, or our realizable systems or natural systems are causal in nature.
okay.
So if I don't know how fruitful was this session as
Yes, sure, ma'am.
and I am
Very-
sure if all these points will be again explained or again came in our future sessions, future
Yes.
3 sessions, and you can understand it better in the later sessions, because these are the fundamentals and these repeat in every signal processing applications. So if you have any doubt, you can ask me anytime. I will be very happy to help
Yes.
you.
We will contact you, ma'am. Surely we will contact you when going through this session.
If you have any doubt during your project or something like that,
Yes.
you can contact us.
That I mentioned. We have to use this information knowledge in our project too. So we have to make it more clear.
Yeah.
So we will contact you surely.
Okay.
Thank you for being with us and for having.
Thank you for giving me
delivered.
this opportunity, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Dear participants, now we have shared the feedback form in the chat. So please fill out the feedback form, and our next session will be at 2:15 p.m. sharp 2:15 p.m. So kindly join with us for the session 2. R. Jaydevan sir from Sri Krishnapuram Government Engineering College, and hope to see you all in the session 2 at 2:15 p.m. Okay, thank you all.